Part 3, Chapter 10 of Short History of the Christian Church by John Fletcher Hurst. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 10. The English Reformation, Second Period, 1553 to 1603. There was great uncertainty as to the succession to Henry VIII. On the occupant of the throne depended largely the question of Protestantism in the British Isles. Henry had left 3 children: Mary, whose mother was Catherine of Aragon; Elizabeth, whose mother was Anne Boleyn; and Edward, whose mother was Jane Seymour. It was now a question as to whether Mary, Elizabeth, or Edward should rule. The result proved that each one wore the crown. But who should first wear it? Henry VIII. And Catherine had been divorced, and hence that ruled out Mary. Anne Boleyn was condemned to death, and that was a declaration that her child, Elizabeth, was illegitimate. Against Edward no such objection could be made. His mother died a natural death, too early and too young to be cast away by the king. All England was divided into parties. The friends of Edward were shrewd and bold. They won at last, and seated the boy on the throne in 1547, when he was only 10 years of age. There was a protectorate over him, the first protector being the king's uncle on his mother's side, Edward Seymour, Duke of Somerset; the second, Dudley, Earl of Warwick. In addition to these men, who were Protestants, and gave a Protestant direction to the administration, Cranmer was the constant and practical adviser of young Edward. In due time England was brought into strong Protestant sympathies, and special efforts were employed to indoctrinate the people in Protestant principles. An improved catechism was used for popular instruction. The Lord's Supper was administered in both kinds, and the Mass, clerical celibacy, the worship of images, and the invocation of saints were abolished. The Protestant ascendancy was marked by cruel repression. Many Catholics, and the more radical Protestants as well, were put to death. Edward VI. died in 1553. There now arose new troubles about the succession, and it was a question as to whether a Protestant or a Romanist should wear the crown. The strongest party would again win, and this time it was Mary's friends. Mary had been a sufferer on account of her Roman Catholic faith. The daughter of Henry VIII. And Catherine of Aragon, she carried to her new position the bitter memory of the injustice done her, and a determination to restore the land to the faith of her mother and her remote Spanish ancestors. A formal alliance with Spain was brought about through her marriage with Philip II. Of Spain. No pains were now spared to bring into force the old order. Parliament hesitated, but its members, finally fearing for their heads, tamely submitted. Power was restored to the ecclesiastical courts to depose and punish as they might judge best. No less than 16,000 clergymen were deposed from their positions. Strict celibacy was enjoined on every pastor. The oath of royal supremacy was no longer required. The English language was banished from the public services, and the Latin restored to its old place. All the old ceremonies in use before Henry were brought back again. Protestant teachers were ejected from the universities. A commission was appointed to suppress heresy, and martyr fires were kindled in various parts of England. A low estimate of persons burned places the martyrdoms at 200. The number would have gone to thousands had not many leading reformers fled to the continent. Strasbourg, Zurich, Geneva, and other places became their homes, where they established services in the English language, and waited until the time might come when they could return home. Elizabeth succeeded Mary in 1558. She was gifted with rare caution, strong will, and a quick and accurate perception of character. She was a devoted Protestant, and immediately set to work to complete the interrupted fabric of reform in her dominions. The country was desperate because of material reverses. England was losing at home and abroad, and the people were ready for any change. Roman Catholic rule had proven its inability to make them prosperous and happy. The queen at once recognized Protestantism as the national faith. The Articles and the Second Book of Homilies were adopted in Parliament and Convocation in 1563, and Protestants were placed in charge of all the churches. The exiles came home from the Continent, and were among the most zealous in promoting the work of reform. The Independents were a growing class of people who believed that neither Henry nor Elizabeth had broken fully from Rome. They looked upon the elaborate ceremonial, the episcopacy, the use of robes, and the mild observance of the Sabbath as wretched remnants of the evil times, and would do away with all such reminders of Antichrist. They refused to adopt the new order, and would establish one of their own, in harmony with the example of the Genevan Church. Elizabeth took strong ground against the Independents. Variation from the established order, either to the side of Rome or of Puritanism, was punished with torture or death. The Act of Uniformity was enforced in 1563, and this was the first stroke of separation. By this act 2,000 clergymen, some of them the most learned and pious in the kingdom, were driven out of their churches and homes. Lords Burleigh and Walsingham endeavored in vain to secure a compromise. The first English presbytery was organized at Wandsworth, and was the practical beginning of all the nonconforming bodies of England. But, despite all the internal divisions of English Protestantism, the Reformation became a fact under Elizabeth. Her long reign brought to England material prosperity, but still more, a strong and enduring Protestantism. The most important event of the English Reformation, in its relation to America, was the rise of the Brownist sect. Robert Brown, born about 1550, was a student in Cambridge. While there, he adopted Puritan views, and became a warm advocate of them. His followers went by the name of Brownists, and were alike firm in their hostility to the Church of England and to Romanism. The Brownists were persecuted, not so much by royal order as by the ecclesiastical courts. Unable to circulate their writings or hold public services, they fled from England and organized a church in Amsterdam, and afterwards at Leyden. In the latter place John Robinson was their pastor. They resolved on leaving Holland, and set sail for the New World. They landed at Plymouth, Massachusetts, in 1620, and became the chief factor for the civil and religious development of the colonies and the United States. Holmes, in his Robinson of Leyden, thus pictures the hour of their departure. No home for these. Too well they knew the mitred king behind the throne. The sails were set, the pennons flew, and westward ho, for worlds unknown. And these were they who gave us birth, the pilgrims of the sunset wave, who won for us this virgin earth, and freedom with the soil they gave. End of chapter 10.